45 young men, all college age, all found in the same rivers and lakes across the Midwest. And near almost every one of them, someone spray-painted a smiley face. That's the theory, and if it's real, it's one of the biggest serial murder cases in American history. This all begins with a kid named Patrick McNeil. Patrick was 21, a student at Fordham University in New York City. Bright kid, the sort of person people wanted around. February 1997, he's out with friends at a bar called the Dapper Dog on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Totally ordinary night. He'd had some drinks, sure, but so had everyone. At some point, he goes outside to wait for a ride, and his friend never shows. That's the last time anyone sees him alive. He just vanishes into the city. His family and friends papered Upper Manhattan with missing person flyers. Nearly 2 months go by. Then, on April 7th, Patrick's body is pulled out of the East River near a pier in Brooklyn, over 12 miles from where he was last seen. Now, you'd think, okay, tragic, but maybe he stumbled into the water that night. It happens. Except the detective on this case, Sergeant Kevin Gannon, looks at Patrick's file, and something doesn't sit right with him. 12 miles is a long way for a body to drift on its own, and the condition Patrick was found in didn't sit easily with the story of a drunk kid who fell in a river 50 days earlier. The autopsy photos didn't match a drowning at all. Drowning victims almost always float face down. But Patrick, he was face up. No blood pooling in his body either. That's something you'd expect to see, but it just wasn't there. His head and chest were charred, like someone used a blowtorch on him. But his back was mostly untouched. That's the kind of pattern you'd see if he'd been tied to a chair, honestly. There was a mark around his neck. 2 deep dents on his skull, too. But the official report never even mentioned them. How do you miss that? Then there were fly eggs in his groin, but they hadn't developed, which means they were laid somewhere warm before his body ever hit that freezing river. His feet barely looked like they'd been in the water at all. Nothing like 2 months submerged. His whole body was just inconsistent. Burned here, untouched there. Decomposed unevenly. None of it added up to a drowning. McNeil's family and NYPD Sergeant Kevin Gannon believed Patrick's body showed signs of torture and that it was stored on land until being dumped in the river shortly before its discovery. Gannon looks Patrick's parents in the eye and promises them he's going to find out what really happened to their son. A promise that would go on to consume the rest of his life. And that's when he finds he's not alone. Because after retiring from the NYPD in 2001, Gannon enlists his old partner, Anthony Duarte. Together, they start pulling other files, and they find Patrick's not alone. They find Chris Jenkins, 21, University of Minnesota lacrosse player, vanished on Halloween night 2002, still in costume after getting kicked out of a bar. Body found in the Mississippi. That case was originally ruled accidental, but in 2006, it got reclassified as a homicide. You don't reclassify a drowning as a murder for no reason. They find Brian Wellsine, 21, disappears on New Year's Eve going into 2000 in Chicago. Body turns up 77 days later on a Lake Michigan beach, but after 77 days in the water, it showed only about 1 week of decomposition. 1 week. After 77 days. We have to be careful here. Decomposition in cold water is unpredictable, and this isn't forensic proof on its own. But that pattern shows up over and over in these cases. So Gannon and Duarte keep pulling files, and they start seeing the same pattern. Nearly every case fits the same profile. A young man in his late teens or early 20s, athletic, well-liked, out drinking with friends. He gets separated from the group. He vanishes. Weeks or months later, his body turns up in a nearby river. The medical examiner rules it a drowning. Case closed. And in a disturbing number of cases, the same symbol, a smiley face, spray-painted somewhere near where the body was found. By 2008, they've reviewed roughly 90 cases and identified patterns in 40 of them. That year, they go public. They believe there's a serial killer, maybe a group of killers, responsible for at least 40 deaths across 11 states and 25 cities. The FBI did not agree. In 2008, they put out a statement saying they'd found no evidence linking these deaths, no evidence of any serial killer, and that the vast majority of the cases appeared to be alcohol-related drownings. Almost 30 years later, we still don't have a clean answer on Patrick McNeil. His family got a body. They never got the truth. While Gannon was still building his case out east, something was happening in Minnesota that would end up tangled into the same theory. October 2002, Michael Knoll, 22, a University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire student, vanishes after drinking with friends. His body is later found. His death ruled an accident. 10 days after that, a young man named Chris Jenkins, the same Chris Jenkins from Gannon's files, vanishes in Minneapolis. Then, on November 9, 2002, Josh Guimond disappears. He was 20, a political science student at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. He'd been at a card game in a dorm room. Around 11:45 p.m., he leaves without saying much, hinting he had somewhere to be. He is never seen again. Unlike every other case in this story, there's no ending here. No body, no recovery date, no autopsy report. Search teams dragged the campus lakes. They lowered the water level. They brought in sonar, cadaver dogs, divers. Nothing. At the time, investigators actually considered whether a serial killer was operating up and down the Mississippi River, whether Knoll, Jenkins, and Guimond might be connected. They ultimately concluded they weren't and closed the door on that theory. But once Jenkins's case got reclassified as a homicide in 2006, some independent investigators reopened that door and folded Guimond back in as a possible victim. Here's why I'm including him, even though he doesn't fit the mold exactly. He's the clearest example of how uncertain this entire theory really is at its edges. Every other victim in tonight's story has a recovered body, an autopsy, a timeline. Josh Guimond has none of that. 23 years later, his father is still fighting for answers, and the case remains open. If there is a group of killers working this corridor, Josh Guimond might be one of the only victims they never gave back. 3 years after Chris Jenkins, it happens again. Same region, same story. Matt Kruzicki was 24, December 23, 2005, days before Christmas. He's at a strip club in East Dubuque, Illinois. He gets ejected. No coat, no wallet, just put out into the cold. He's never seen alive again. His body isn't found until March 2006, at a spot on the Mississippi River locals call Dead Man's Slough. That name alone is unsettling enough. But near where he was found, there was graffiti. Not a smiley face this time, but a single word spray-painted nearby. Sinsiniwa. Nobody's ever fully explained what that word means or why it was there. Some say it's a local place name. Some say it's nothing. But when you're already looking for patterns, an unexplained word spray-painted near a body doesn't exactly put your mind at ease. Now we go to La Crosse, Wisconsin. And if you're keeping count, this city becomes important because it isn't just one case here, it's a cluster. Luke Holman was 21, a college athlete, September 29th, 2006, during Oktoberfest, he's out on a bar crawl with friends. At some point, he disappears from the group. 3 days later, his body is found, and there are head and hand injuries on it. The kind of injuries a medical examiner has to explain one way or another. So here's what independent investigators, retired NYPD Sergeant Kevin Gannon and forensic sociologist Dr. D. Lee Gilbertson found. First, there was a silver SUV. Tracking and cadaver dogs both hit on Luke's scent inside it. Blacklight found human DNA in the back seat. Cops let the driver go, didn't seize the car, didn't test the DNA. Second, Luke's phone was under his bed the next morning, but he'd been using it until 2:02 a.m. How'd it get home without him? There was also blood, a trail of it on the Cameron Avenue Bridge. Police collected samples, bagged them, put them into evidence, but they never tested them. Now, the medical examiner found orange flecks on Luke's body, tiny little pieces of something. She never figured out what they were. She never tested them. But here's where it gets strange. Someone had spray painted an orange smiley face on a road right near the river. Same color, same area. La Crosse police never connected the two. The county medical examiner ruled it an accident before the autopsy report was even finished. And then there's the belt. Luke's belt was fastened in the very last hole, way too tight for a guy his size, and it had missed a belt loop. That doesn't happen by accident. Someone had dressed him again after he was already dead. Gannon and Gilbertson laid it all out. This wasn't an accident. Luke isn't the first. He's the 8th young man to drown in La Crosse under similar circumstances in 9 years. 8 in one city, all around the same age, all after a night out, all in the water. And remember this detail, because it's going to matter later. This is the same La Crosse Police Department that would later say, publicly, that no smiley face symbols were ever connected to their cases. 8 drownings, and the department that investigated all of them says the killer's calling card never showed up once. Make of that what you will. Todd Geib was 22, Michigan kid. June 2005, he's at a bonfire party. Friends, fire, drinks, warm night. Then Todd disappears. The search that follows is huge. They comb the area. They search the local lake, that specific lake. They find nothing. 3 weeks go by. Then Todd's body is found in that same lake, the one they already searched. And it gets stranger. After 3 weeks in the water, his body showed minimal decomposition, inconsistent with 22 days submerged. That same impossible detail from Brian Welzine's case, 3 states and 5 years apart. The skeptics have an answer, and it's fair. Cold, deep water slows decomposition dramatically. Bodies shift or resurface as gases change, and search teams miss things in murky, huge lakes. All of that is true. All of that is possible. But you stack it up, a searched lake, a body that appears 3 weeks later, barely decomposed, and you start to understand how a person looks at file after file like this and becomes convinced there's a hand behind it. I go back and forth on Todd's case. The innocent explanation exists, but something about a searched lake giving up a body it supposedly didn't have, that stays with you. This next stop is where the whole theory either collapses or explodes into something bigger than anyone imagined. But it takes 2 cases to get there. First, Paul Kochu, December 2014. He's a nurse at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh. Totally normal Monday night. He watches Monday Night Football like a few million other people. and then he disappears. The search takes over 3 months. In March 2015, he's found in the Ohio River near Wheeling, West Virginia. The official cause of death? Undetermined drowning. Not accident, not homicide. Undetermined, which is its own kind of unsettling, because it means even the medical examiner couldn't commit to an answer. 2 years later, it happens again, in the same city. Dakota James was 23, a graduate student at Duquesne University. January 2017, Dakota goes missing after a night out, last seen on surveillance footage. Pittsburgh is already nervous by this point because of Paul, so when Dakota vanishes, people are already whispering. The search goes on for weeks. On March 6, 2017, 40 days after he disappeared, his body is recovered from the Ohio River. And this hits the trifecta. 1. After 40 days in the river, his body showed almost no decomposition. That detail, a third time now, in the third state. 2. Smiley face graffiti was reportedly found at the recovery site. The actual calling card. 3. Dakota's family hired their own forensic experts, and some suggested his neck injuries were more consistent with strangulation than accidental drowning. That's heavily disputed, and the official cause stayed drowning. But you've got an independent expert raising the word strangulation. You can't unhear that. And here's where the whole thing gets almost too big to hold. When Gannon and Duarte first went public in 2008, the count was around 40 victims across 11 states. By 2017, that number had crept up to 45 as Gannon and Duarte kept examining evidence stretching from the late 1990s into the 2010s. By 2019, an Oxygen documentary series had it climbing past 200 potential victims, now with talk of dark web connections. And by 2025, Kevin Gannon is claiming 700 potential victims, an estimate that's since expanded to include a cluster of recent deaths in Houston, Texas. 700. So, in 2008, the FBI released an official statement on this theory. Their words, not mine. They had not developed any evidence to support links between these deaths. No evidence substantiating a serial killer or killers, and the vast majority of the instances appeared to be alcohol-related drownings. Then, in 2010, the Center for Homicide Research published an 18-point refutation called Drowning the Smiley Face Murder Theory. Their argument: these deaths cluster around college towns because that's where drunk young men are concentrated. Cold water and alcohol are a lethal combination. Smiley face graffiti is common everywhere. And when you go looking for a pattern, you'll always find one. And here's a detail that really complicates things for the theory's supporters. La Crosse, Wisconsin, a city with 8 of these drownings, is on record saying they never found a single smiley face connected to any of their cases. That's the one city with the most victims using the least evidence for the theory's own signature clue. So you have 2 completely different explanations for the same set of facts. On one side, a group of trained homicide detectives who see a signature in body after body. On the other, the FBI and researchers with statistics turning coincidence into conspiracy. Are these deaths the work of someone hunting young men along the cold rivers of America? Or just bad luck that we mistake for a pattern? Maybe we'll never know. Share your thoughts in the comments. If this one got under your skin, stick around, subscribe for more. There are a lot more stories I can't wait to share with you. Until then, stay safe.